one of the things that's targeted are cow farms, right? People are saying, well, if we're eating a lot of beef, right, that's actually putting more carbon emissions, right? Just raising cattle is putting out a lot of carbon emissions. Why are they saying that?
Oh, this is such a great topic. Well, because the mainstream narrative tells us that, right? They've done analyses. For example, there's a paper called Livestock's Long Shadow. And it reported that the livestock sector was, in fact, contributing more emissions than the transportation sector. But when you really broke this paper down, what it showed was they didn't do a full accounting or a life cycle analysis for both systems, just for the agricultural system, where they're looking at processing, raising them, the feed. But when they compared it to the emissions of the car, it was just the gas emissions, not the production. It wasn't a fair analysis. And when there was a full analysis, they found that the transportation sector produced far more. And so there is this push. The big elephant in the room is basically coal, oil, gas. They're contributing about 60% of the emissions. And when you look at the data in America specifically, cows are responsible for about 2% of emissions, crop agriculture for about 4.5%, and all livestock about 3.9%. And so there is just a lot of misinformation that happens here. And that is even taken into consideration when we have feedlots in the equation, right? So we can even do better than feedlots. Those are based on our current methods of production. But when you look at regenerative agriculture, the thing that really excites me is everyone is focused on begging these huge corporations to reduce emissions. And I think that's important, right? We've released carbon into the atmosphere. It's trapping heat, and a lot of scientists agree that it's causing climate change. But even if we stopped emissions today, right, it would still take us years and years and years for us to get back down to a level of carbon in the atmosphere that people believe would begin drawdown, right? Where we would be able to reverse this trend. So what we need to focus more on is how do we get it back in the soil? Yeah. Because the soil is where it came from in the first place. And people often think, trees are the key, but the soil, in the top meter of soil, there's more carbon than in, the atmosphere. And than trees can hold. And it is where we need to look in order to get the carbon back out of the atmosphere. And when people are blaming animal agriculture, A, the numbers are distorted, as we just discussed, even in the feedlot system, but B, they're not taking into account the fact that regenerative agriculture can sequester carbon and has been shown to do such in at least 2 trials that I'm aware of. And so again, we have to be really nuanced in the discussion because different areas will yield different results and different soils have different levels of carbon. And so there's a lot of complexity, but the research is promising and there are other benefits outside of the carbon sequestration, increased biodiversity, increased microbial life, increased nutrient density, because the plants and the health of the soil kind of work together to create nutrient dense food and habitats for wildlife. The pollinators are coming back. I mean, water cycling and water retention, decreased soil erosion, drought. It's just the benefits of regenerative agriculture are many. And when we only look at just a single unit or just the emissions, we're missing the bigger part of the equation.
Yeah, it's a really great summary there. And so basically what you're saying is that number one, the emissions coming from these cows are very, very small amount. But if they're actually being raised on grass, right, 100% grass, as opposed to a feedlot where they're being fed grains, they're kind of being kept in really tight quarters, and they have very little access to pasture, if any at all, particularly towards the end of their life. In that kind of setting, they're releasing carbon, which all of us do. All of us have some level of carbon footprint. But normally, nature, when nature is, when we're around nature and we're around grass, and we have enough trees and enough grass, it's offsetting that. It's kind of detoxifying that carbon and recycling it. We use the term sequestering it and, reusing it, repurposing it. And so when we have cows that are on grass, right, and they're living on the grass, and they're in these kind of farms, these regenerative farms where they're kind of going from one pasture to another pasture. When they're off of one side of the pasture, that pasture is now growing, right? Because they trim down the grass, they poop on it, which is actually, especially when they're eating grass, is actually like fertilizer, right? Which helps the microbial life. And then they move to another set of pasture and they're eating that. Now, all that pasture is actually sequestering the carbon In fact, I've seen data that shows that they're actually sequestering more carbon when you have a pasture, when you have a farm like this, than the cows are off-putting. Now, obviously, if you have too many cows, like it depends on how many cows you have in the particular pasture land. But if you're doing it properly, then you're actually offsetting almost like twice as much carbon you're sequestering as the amount of carbon that's being output by the cows.